This is going to be a bit of information about the Warden Tank. We're going to go over all of the skills that you need as a tank, the passives, and we're going to look at like the benefits, the buffs, the debuffs, the group benefits, that kind of stuff. The Warden Tank is very, very well built for tanking. It's a good option, especially for like newer players. The sustain benefits are there, the self-healing's there, the crowd control's there. They are quite well built for tanking generally. In terms of kind of group content, they perform very well. There's a lot of groups that are like, when they're trying to optimize their group, will often go with a Warden Tank as one of the options. One of the other positives of a Warden Tank is, even without using things like Frost Clench and stuff, you can access Minor Brittle quite easily. Like there's routes to using certain skills that can create more of a chilled up time to create that Minor Brittle and stuff. So the Warden Tank is very, very good for that. It's good for defensive side of things. It's good for the protection of your group. It's good for the protection of yourself. So there's lots and lots of benefits to using a Warden Tank. So we're going to have a look at the skills first of all, and the passives that you might use if you want to play a Warden Tank. I'm just going to cover all the things you need to like level up and things you need to pick up as you're progressing. Okay, so firstly, Animal Companions. Now, the ultimate from the Animal Companion category is not one that you're going to need, but you will potentially pick it up as a slottable. Now, the only time that this is possibly good for slotting on your bar is for the passive benefits if you don't use one of the other skills. So typically you wouldn't use it, but you may use it as like, in a similar way to people use Barrier for the Magicka Recovery, you may use this for Magicka Recovery in situations where you're not using one of the other skills on your bar. Next we've got Dive, and there's two different morphs here, but this is an option for potentially causing off balance. Now there are situations where I've used this myself as a Warden Tank. One of them was on the Locustes fight in Sunspire hard mode, and I was using this because I was playing at range. Now the reason why this matters is because when using it at range, as you can see here, it deals more damage based on how far away the enemy is. If you are more than 7 meters away from the target, you set them off balance for 7 seconds. So this is an option for creating off balance if you need to as a Warden Tank. And if you're going to be playing at range, this is also quite good if you want to introduce a bit of damage to your build, because there are some certain situations where that might be the case. So if you're off tanking in a trial with very, very low kind of amounts of incoming damage and low amounts of tanking requirements, things like Sunspire hard mode on the Locustes fight, those kind of fights, this is a potential damage option for you. Okay, next we've got Scorch, which we wouldn't typically use. I have used this as like a hybrid tank build, so when I'm playing a Warden and I want to introduce damage again, when I've been doing like the AA, I like to set up as a hybrid tank for the first couple of bosses until we get to the end. So using a skill like Subterranean Assault is quite handy for that. So if you take this morph, Deep Fissure, it applies major and minor breach to enemies hit, reducing their physical and spell resistance. So the reason why you might potentially use this skill is because if you're using like a double Frost Staff build, it might be difficult for you to reach that minor breach uptime and have access to minor breach. So what you might do is you might use this particular skill and use it to try and obtain that major and minor breach. It's not ideal because obviously it says there, it creates a group of Shulk that attack after 3 seconds. So there's a bit of a delay on when you cast a skill and when it's going to apply the major and minor breach. So you have to kind of anticipate. So you're going to be casting it quite often, which isn't ideal. But it is an option. Let's say you're in, like I say, a double Frost Staff build and using this skill to get that major and minor breach. There are other methods of obtaining major and minor breach though. Things like Caltrops is going to get you major breach. Minor breach can be obtained by using a charged weapon with a absorb stamina glyph. So there are different things you could do. You don't have to use this to obtain those with a Frost Staff build. Next we've got Swarm, and typically you'd go for Fetch Your Infection as a tank, and that's because it's a Magicka costing skill. What you would do with this skill is you would apply it to the enemy on cooldown to provide your group with minor vulnerability benefits, which is going to increase the amount of damage that the enemy takes by 5%. So your group's going to do more damage to any enemy that has this applied to them. Now, there are other methods of getting minor vulnerability. It's not a difficult debuff to obtain, but if you don't have it, you need to have it because it's going to provide a damage increase to your group. So there are other methods of obtaining minor vulnerability. It's quite an easy debuff, but Vector Infection is a very consistent one. It's just going to be active. It's going to be there. So if you don't have it already, it's something that you should be using. Next, we've got Betty Netch, and both morphs here are very useful for varying situations. So, for example, if you're doing something like Cloud Rest, in Cloud Rest, the most difficult resource for you will be Magicka. Like, let's say you're doing the portal. The difficulty with using a tank in Cloud Rest for the portals and things like that is the Magicka, because you might have to go into the portal. You're taking a lot of damage because you've got the dot. You might have the heavy attack. You can use different skills like Shimmer and Shield to obviously deal with that. But Magicka is typically the thing that you're looking for the most. So you would use the Blue Betty to restore Magicka every second. One of the little nice things about this is every 5 seconds an Netch removes one negative effect. So it's like a free purge because this skill costs nothing. And it will generate Magicka every second. It also, it gives you major brutality and sorcery, which increases your weapon and spell damage. The reason why that's good is it increases things like your healing. It's going to increase things like that. So when you heal, it's going to be, you're going to heal for more because your weapon and spell damage are higher. The other morph is obviously Bull Netch, and that converts instead to restore stamina. In most situations, you would go for this instead. Now, there are certain situations where you don't need to use either one of these because you maybe don't need the sustain. If you actually look at it, the sustain benefits are not huge because, as it says there, it restores 4992 stamina over 22 seconds. So it's quite a long, drawn-out process gaining that stamina. But when you combine all the little benefits, it's free, it's giving you stamina every second for 22 seconds, it gives you major brutality and sorcery, and it's a free purge. It starts to kind of add up, and it gives you passive benefits as well. It's not just the benefits from the skill. There's not many skills that you might use from the Animal Companion skill line. And there's also like a limited amount of bar space that you've got. So some of the passives here are things that you want to have, and so the Netch might be one of your best options for obtaining those passives. But yeah, either more for these. You want to have them both leveled up, but in most cases you'll use the Bull Netch. In Magicka heavy situations, you'll switch it to Blue Betty, and there we go. Next we've got this skill, and you would generally go for Deceptive Predator. And the reason you'd use this is it's for a speed boost. And the reason why you'd use this particular skill is because it's easier to obtain this than it is to get things like Race Against Time from the Sigicorda skill line. So it will increase your movement speed by 30% for 6 seconds. You also get Minor Evasion, which reduces your damage by AoE attacks by 10%. So that can be nice. If you're in a fight where there's really, really high AoE damage, then you could potentially use this to kind of reduce that damage a little bit. So maybe you're a new tank and you're going into Sunspire, you've got the Dragon Breath. That's quite a hard-hitting area of effect. So by using Minor Evasion in there, that might help you be able to deal with it a little bit better. Okay, onto the passives. Now, these passives, okay, so you've got when your Animal Companion skill ends, you're healed for 1 to 60 health. So it's worth having it because you're just going to get a little bit of healing when the skills end. So especially, you're most likely to be using the Netch and Swarm. And so when those end, you'll get a heal. When you cast an Animal Companion ability while you are in combat, you generate 4 ultimate once every 8 seconds. So every time you cast your abilities while in combat, you're going to generate a bit of ultimate. So basically, Betty Netch, for example, the Blue Betty or the Bull Netch, when you cast it, you're in combat. Not only are you getting those benefits, but you're also going to generate ultimate by casting it. So that's another benefit and another reason to kind of use that for ultimate regeneration. The Flourish passive, this is really important. So it increases your magic and stamina recovery by 12%. So this is why you might potentially slot Feral Guardian. If you don't have one of these other skills on your bar, then you want to have Feral Guardian slotted and not to be used, but it's there so that you can benefit from this 12% increased recovery. And then finally, you've got Advanced Species. Increase your damage done by 2%. So you don't need this. If you're a tank, you don't actually need to pick up this passive unless, like, if you've got enough spare skill points and you want to introduce a little bit of damage to your build, or maybe you do a bit of overland content occasionally, then obviously you will want to take that. Okay, so we've got the green balance skills now, and For tanks, there are a few that you're going to want to pick up here. So the ultimate, not really useful for tanking. Although it kind of does generate really fast. The heal's really small from a tank perspective, so it's not really worth taking it. Fungal growth. So the enchanted growth morph of this can be quite useful to have as a tank. And the reason why is mainly because when you heal people in your group, you will give them more max health. That will also provide them with minor intellect and endurance, which increase their magic and stamina recovery by 15%. So there is potential for this skill to be useful. I quite like it for 4-man content because it means, like I say, I'm giving my group more health, but I'm also giving this, like, the recoveries as well. And that's really nice to have additional recovery. Okay, next we've got budding seeds. This is a skill that you would potentially want to pick up as a tank. This is so that you can proc your maturation passive, increasing max health by 10%, the minor toughness. So to get the minor toughness, you need to heal your group, and that can be kind of difficult. Now, the reason why you'd use this is because it's a big circle. It's a huge circle for people to stand in. So this can be useful, and you can throw it as well. So this is why you'd use it. You don't like really use it for the heal. You could be using it also for the synergy that it provides. Maybe you've got someone in your group using Alkosh. Then obviously this is an additional synergy to help the uptime a little bit further as well. So you've got a synergy and you're proccing that minor toughness. Living Vines is the next one. So you don't really want to use leeching vines. Like this used to be kind of okay. But minor lifesteal is a very, very kind of a weak buff to obtain in terms of the healing that you can get for yourself. It's far better to use the other morph, Living Trellis, because this provides additional healing. So you heal yourself when it ends. You've got some extra benefits that heal you. And you're most likely already going to have minor lifesteal in your group anyway. So it's no point in using Leeching Vines for minor lifesteal, which you've most likely already got. So Leeching Vines is not really a morph that you want to use. Living Trellis is better because it gives you additional healing. Now, there's not really many situations where you really need to use this, but it can be useful for proccing certain passives and for certain situations where you need a lot of healing. So let's say you're not you're not feeling very comfortable in the portals and Cloud Rest. This can be used for an additional heal. Maybe you're the main tank in Execute of Cloud Rest. You need an additional heal. This is going to be good for that as well. So if you need to add some additional healing to your Warden build, Living Trellis is going to be an option. We don't really use Lotus Flower or Green. We don't use either one of these really. And we don't really use either of these either. These are not really that useful for us as a tank. Obviously the healing is quite a lot. It's quite a big heal. But you will just benefit more from using your Polar Wind. In terms of the passives, obviously some of these are pretty useless if you don't have a green balance skill slotted. So like, for example, this is only useful if you have a green balance skill slotted. So when you heal yourself an ally under 40%, you gain Major Mending. So it's a good access to Major Mending. This is really good for Cloud Rest Execute phase. That's why I use this Living Trellis, because when it combines with some of the passives here, this Accelerated Growth, for example, it means I've got that Major Mending in Execute. Nature's Gift. Now this is a sustain passive, so when you heal an ally with a green balance ability, you gain 250 magicka or stamina, whichever resource pool is lower. So this could be used, so again, you could be using this to proc that by activating it on people, by throwing down Healing Seed over your group to proc that minor toughness. You could also be getting some sustain benefits. So gaining stamina back on a Warden can be quite easy if you're combining different skills together to get multiple different sources of incoming resources. So obviously the Netch that we mentioned before, and if you're also benefiting from the Nature's Gift passive, you've obviously got quite a bit of resources coming in. And the next one, increase your healing done with green balance abilities. So again, if you don't have a green balance ability, there's no point in spending 2 skill points on this. If you are using them, then obviously it's kind of nice to have some additional healing benefits by having this passive. And then finally, one of the main Warden buffs that you've got. So the unique Warden buff is the minor toughness, increasing max health by 10% for 20 seconds. You just need to heal your group. Now, it doesn't have to be a green balance heal. It can be any heal. So you could be using healing orbs, for example, to get some healing onto your group to proc this passive. It doesn't have to be one of these, but obviously there's the other benefits. Like I say, nature's gift, accelerated growth and things like that. You're going to benefit from multiple things if you're utilizing those. Finally, we've got the Winter's Embrace. Again, with the ultimate, not really that useful. So, you and nearby allies gain major protection. Now, you don't need this for yourself, because if you need major protection, you can just slot Revealing Flare, which is passively going to give you major protection. There are not really any group situations where you absolutely need to have major protection for your group. Like, it's just not necessary. So you don't need this ultimate. I really wouldn't waste like points picking it up. Next you got Frost Cloak. This got buffed with the High Isle patch. It's increased the radius to 36 meters. So this is even more useful than it was before. So this is where we start to see the Warden Tank becoming that defensive monster for the group. Expansive Frost Cloak gives your whole group major resolve. So anybody within 36 meters who's in your group is going to get major resolve, increasing their spell and physical resistance by almost 6k for 20 seconds. You've also got, obviously, the increased health as well, and the Frost Cloak for that resolve. So you're really buffing your group up in terms of their defense. Ice Fortress grants you minor protection. Now, minor protection reduces your damage taken by 5%. So you don't really need this. You're going to benefit way more from providing your group with this than you are by selfishly using this for the minor protection. If you need minor protection, get the Temporal Guard Ultimate from the Sigicorda skill line and slot that on your front bar. Minor protection is 5% reduced damage taken. It's not a super important buff for yourself. In those extremely high damage situations, though, you would just be better off still using Expansive Frost Cloak and then using Temporal Guard on your front bar. Okay, Impaling Shards moves over to Gripping Shards. So this is an immobilization skill, so this can be good for crowd control in dungeon and 4-man content. If you follow any of my content in the past, you'll have seen that I like to now use Elemental Blockade and Pulsar. And that is my preferred method of crowd control, because it's 2 buttons the same as it would be using Gripping Shards and Blockade, but you're going to achieve the same with the immobilization. But with Blockade and Pulsar, you're going to get a lot more benefits, a lot more buffs and debuffs. Gripping Shards is going to potentially proc the chilled status effect, but you can already obtain the chilled status effect by just using Pulsar. Pulsar is an AoE chilled status effect, an AoE immobilization. It's able to obtain all those things. You're able to reduce the enemy's max health. There's a lot of benefits to just using Pulsar and Blockade instead of Gripping Shards, but you can use Gripping Shards if you want. You could also use Gripping Shards on a boss to get that chilled status effect. And that's kind of sometimes a thing that you could do. Winter's Revenge, the difference here is you can throw this at the enemy. Like Gripping Shards is around your counter. Winter's Revenge can be aimed and played across the room. So if you are range tanking something, you could probably still get Minor Brittle and the chilled effect by using Winter's Revenge and placing it at distance. I would rather put Expansive Frost Cloak on the healer, because then the tank could run something like if you've got a Warden Tank and the Warden Healer, I wouldn't even slot Frost Cloak. I'd be slotting Spell Symmetry instead. So you've got huge Magicka gains. Like, what a lot of people don't seem to understand as well is if you have a Warden Tank in your group and they keep a good uptime of Frost Cloak, you don't need to use a skill for Major Resolve. You don't need one. And in like a lot of groups and a lot of situations, you just don't need it because you've got somebody who's actually already provided it to the whole group that you don't need it. So it's kind of a waste of a bar space if you are using a skill that gives Major Resolve in a lot of situations, because you just don't need it. Like I say, Spell Symmetry is something you could be using instead. Like, if you have that and you can guarantee that you have Major Resolve from the Warden, just swap Spell Symmetry, because you might still need the Magicka, but you can benefit from having... Yeah, you don't get any Major Resolve, but now, not only do you get the 3000 Magicka, you get reduced cost of your next Magicka ability, which is really strong as well. Like, if you use Spell Symmetry and then Green Dragonblood, for example, Green Dragonblood's like over 4k in cost of Magicka, so reducing that by 30% is really, really good. In some situations where you might need Purge, if you use Spell Symmetry before Purge, then obviously you can reduce the cost of Purge. And those really expensive Magicka skills, all of a sudden, can be much easier. But you've got to kind of think about it. But you're going to cast your Spell Symmetry, then cast your skill, and then reduce the cost as well. So you want to make sure that you kind of remembering that and understanding it and applying it, or else obviously you can waste a bit of time. The next skill we've got is Arctic Wind, Polar Wind. Now, Polar Wind is just absolutely fantastic. So the initial heal also heals a nearby ally. This is huge because the heal that you get from this, especially when it like crits, so when you've got other buffs going and you kind of... It scales with max health. When you use this, it heals you, it gives you a heal over time, and it heals somebody else, and it does frost damage. It's just so much stuff going on at the same time that it's just too good not to use it. I have seen some other builds using Arctic Blast. Enemies hit by the damage multiple times are stunned. Now, like, it's not a reliable way of crowd control by using Arctic Blast. It's better off to just use the method we talked about before by using Pulsar and Blockade for the immobilization and all of the tons of debuffs and buffs you get from doing that combination of skills. But Arctic Blast, yeah, it will stun enemies, but it's not a reliable method of crowd control. Crystallized Shield. Shimmering Shield is the one you've got to go for here because you get the Major Heroism, which is increasing your incoming ultimate. This is a great skill for dealing with projectile damage, but it's also the fact that you're going to get that Major Heroism. So if you're doing Cloud Rest, again, this is an amazing skill because you just go in and you can be unblocked and you cast this and it will absorb the full heavy attack from Zamaja. And it's just so good. Like, it's a huge damage shield. Nothing can compete with the damage shield that you get from Shimmering Shield. The fact that you also get the addition of Major Heroism for 6 seconds is another really good thing. Now, there are some situations where I've used Shimmering Shield to generate ultimate faster. So if you know that you're in a situation where you're going to get projectile damage, you can rely on it to build ultimate. When I think of a place where I did that, we used to do this in Sunspire hard mode on Navintas when I was on the Warden Tank. I would use Shimmering Shield on the last boss, and then I would taunt the Flame Atros as the main tank when they hit me with when they used to throw the fireball at me. That would hit my Shimmering Shield, that would proc my Major Heroism, and then I was able to dish out an insane amount of Warhorns because I was able to get Minor Heroism and Major Heroism and build my ultimate with my different passives, and then I was dishing out ultimates for fun. So this is a very good skill both for the damage shield and for the fact that you get the Major Heroism. If you know that you can like taunt a little ad or something that you don't usually worry about with most tank classes, but it's something that you can taunt on a Warden and benefit from it hitting your shield and getting that Major Heroism, you're able to generate huge amounts of ultimate very quickly, and that's obviously got a great group benefit if you're going to be casting more ultimates and you're going to be able to have a higher uptime of your major force and things like that. And then finally, for the actual skills, we've got Frozen Gate. For this, you would want to take Frozen Device. There is a lot of people who ask me about Frozen Device. Now, this teleports enemies to you. So this is the Warden's version of a chain or a pull skill. It is not super reliable in content where things are running at you. It's good for situations like arenas where stuff spawns in a place and then it can be pulled to you and you can kind of pre-anticipate it. So let's talk like Black Rose Prison and Dragonstar Arena. When enemies are spawning in, you can put down your portal like and pre-anticipate where it's going to be, and then it will appear in the portal and it will teleport to you. The same with Cloud Rest. If you put the portals down on top of the actual portal, they will pull the ads to you when they spawn into the main room. So it's kind of good for those situations where you know where things are going to spawn. You can pre-lay them. And because you can put down multiple portals as well, you can put down Frozen Device multiple times, then it means that you can pull things in really fast, even quicker than chains. Now, the only downside to it is kind of difficult to aim. So if you go into a dungeon, for example, and you're walking in and you've got a couple of different ads around the edges of the room, it can be difficult to aim it when you've got stuff in front of you and you're targeting different enemies. It can be difficult to throw it into locations where you've got enemies stood kind of stagnated and they're already there. But it is very good for like pre-placing it in situations where you can. Now, you might be somebody who has had plenty of practice. With practice, obviously you could use this, and it's better to use this than using Silver Leash because this is magical costing. Anything that's magical costing is always a better option than using a stamina costing skill, especially something like Silver Leash. Silver Leash is a very bad skill because it costs stamina, and if you chain something that is not chainable, you will just lose the stamina. It doesn't refund it. That is one of the huge downsides to Silver Leash. With this, If an enemy walks onto a portal, onto your frozen device, it's not chainable, maybe it's CC immune because it's been hit by a Sork pet, then it's just not gonna use up your frozen device. It's just gonna stand there, and then when it becomes chainable, it will pull in. So there are some benefits to using this, and if you are really good at, like I say, if you're good at aiming it and you're able to aim it really fast, then obviously it's better than using Silver Leash. But most people would rather use this in those situations where you can prelay it, and then use Silver Leash where you need fast chaining and you need to pull things in really fast. On for the passives. So, Glacial Presence increases the chance of applying the chilled status effect to enemies with Winter's Embrace abilities by 200%. Enemies and allies who have recently been chilled take 10% more critical damage and healing from you. This isn't really like absolutely necessary to gain that chilled effect. If you just use a charged Ice Staff with Pulsar, you're going to get AoE chilled effect the same as you would with Impaling Shards. So you don't absolutely have to do this. You don't even need to use a charged Ice Staff to get the chilled effect with Pulsar. I do think, personally, Pulsar is the better option in terms of trying to get the chilled effect. But this means that the Warden does have that alternative option if you wanted to use that kind of... If you wanted to use those Gripping Shards instead, you obviously take this passive, and then you're able to get that as well. So, it's an option, but I don't really think you have to. With Blockade and Pulsar, that's plenty of AoE, it's plenty of frost damage, it's plenty of chances to proc chilled. Frozen Armor, so increases your physical and spell resistance. You might as well take this as a tank because your resistances are always useful. And there's a good chance you're going to have quite a few of these skills. Like, you're going to have that one, you're definitely going to have that one, you might have that one, there's a good chance you'll have that, and then you might potentially have that. So, in some situations, you might have 4 or 5 of these skills, so that's going to boost your armor quite a lot. Icy Aura reduces the effectiveness of snares applied to you by 15%. So, I mean, you might as well take it because it's going to help a little bit when you get snared, but it's not. There's not like a huge amount of situations where it's going to be hugely beneficial in PvE, but you might as well take it. And then Piercing Cold, increase your magic and frost damage by 10%. You don't need this. If you're a tank and you're not looking to push any damage or not doing any solo situations, then you don't really need to worry too much about picking up Piercing Cold. The kind of strengths of the Warden Tank, so they are like fantastic for group and survival benefits. Like, they've got quite a lot of group utility, so you've got quite a few skills in there that can provide benefits to your group, for damage, for survival, so they're really, really good. You're able to completely absorb projectiles with that Shimmering Shield. That is a huge benefit to situations where you've got a lot of projectile damage. So really, really good, because you can just take it, like if you're in a situation where you might need to roll dodge, but if you roll dodge, you're going to get one shot by a projectile, but you can cast Shimmering Shield and it won't matter. You can just completely avoid taking any damage at all. So that's a really, really strong thing. They've got really, really good self-healing, and they can even heal an ally for huge amounts thanks to Polar Wind and the humongous heal that it gives for you, the heal over time, and it heals somebody for an equal value. Which is just mad, considering it scales with your max health. So it's like being a healer and able to do like that emergency heal, but as a tank. Self-sustain is pretty good. Obviously, there are other classes that are better at sustain, but the Warden is definitely not the worst. It's one of the better ones, depending on how you play, depending on if you're using a green balance skill and things like that. It's going to have some decent sustain benefits. They are good at debuffing and AoE debuffing enemies, and the crowd control is better than most in terms of, like, if you're not using Pulsar Blockade, if you're not using Vatashran, they've got portals, they've got Gripping Shards. It's better than most of the classes' options. Now, some of the weaknesses, the green balance passives can be kind of hard to make use of as a tank. Like, it's kind of hard to find the bar space on a Warden sometimes because there's just so many skills that could be useful for, like, certain things, or you might want to provide too much stuff. There's too many, like, useful skills with little perks, and if you're the only Warden in a group as well, you'd struggle to cover everything. So, yeah, the green balance passives can be hard to make use of, even though they are really, really good. The lack of bar space because of the skills that you need to run. So, if you are the only Warden, again, you might have to run Frostcloak, you might have to run Fetch Your Infection, you might have to run certain skills that mean it's very difficult to fit everything on that you need. If you're having to use the things that your group need, those must-have skills, you might have to lose other areas you build to be able to give your group those benefits. Magicka Sustain is generally okay, but because you're using Frost Cloak, you might struggle in terms of your Magicka Sustain in really high Magicka situations because you don't have balance. So the lack of balance can be an issue sometimes. It depends if you figure out a way to work in spell symmetry in situations where you need it for those high damage Magicka situations if you're the only Warden. If you're obviously a Warden Tank and there's also a Warden Healer, you might not need to use that Frost Cloak, and then you could obviously use your spell symmetry instead. One of the other weaknesses, Frozen Device is a little bit slow and difficult to aim, but you can use Silver Leash, but Silver Leash isn't that great. Obviously, it's not really much competition for the Dragon Knight's chains. And the final weakness really is Warden Healers are very, very common in most groups. Warden Healers are extremely common. In that situation, the Warden Tank is very, very diminished. So the Wardens don't offer a huge amount of stuff. If you've got one other Warden in your group on a support role, then having a second support Warden isn't really that useful. So the Warden can be kind of, if you're trying to optimize group content, if you're trying to really figure out your bar, it can be quite tricky to set up a Warden Tank if you've got a Warden Healer, and there's so many things that you don't want to cross over because there's no point. And so it will require a bit of a kind of managing of that situation. In terms of like all of the Warden's group buffs, obviously I'm just going to list off the group buffs that you get. So you get Minor Vulnerability from Fetter Infection. You've got Major Resolve from that expansive Frost Cloak for your group. You've got Minor Toughness for yourself and your group through the Maturation passive. You got the Minor Intellect and Endurance via Enchanted Growth. You got a Group Synergy with Budding Seed, and that's also a method of kind of proccing that Maturation passive. You got an additional Group Heal with Polar Wind. Off Balance versus the Screaming Cliff Racer. You got AoE, Major and Minor Breach with that Deep Fissure. So there we go. That is everything you need to know about Warden Tanks. Obviously, if you are setting up a Warden Tank, we're going to have I'm going to have a Warden Tank build for High Isle, a new and updated version for dungeon content, for all that kind of stuff. So make sure you check out that next patch when it comes out. So guys, thanks for listening to me.